Her true story from Missouri. My granddaughter said, "You embarrassed me at her wedding, so I took back the venue key." She cried over the cake. I watched from my car. "Don't speak at the reception. Your voice is too old-timey. Can you not wear that old thing to my wedding? You look poor, Grandma." My granddaughter's words cut through the curtain of the bridal suite like a knife. I stood frozen, my hand clutching the handkerchief her mother had embroidered years ago. It was delicate, white linen with tiny roses stitched in pink and green, a family heirloom that had passed through 3 generations. Now it trembled between my fingers. I did not speak. I did not move. My granddaughter, resplendent in her lace gown, spun away, brushing past her mother and the bridesmaids with a final flick of impatience. The wedding planners hovered behind a makeshift arch covered in silk flowers, whispering to one another, phones in hands, glances darting my way. Every movement around me felt frantic, the florist fixing last blooms, the photographer adjusting lights, the coordinator checking the timeline. I felt invisible, shoved aside like an unseasoned prop. But I was not a prop. I was the woman who had held this girl when she was 6, her big eyes trembling with grief after her mother died in that car accident. I had stepped from grandmother to primary caregiver overnight, when her father could not bear to lose another woman he loved. I had signed permission slips, guided her homework, whispered encouragement into her ear before every recital and every middle school test. I had sewn patchwork quilts to keep her warm in winter and read her stories in that same room where now she stood in white, her face set in a mask I did not recognize. I remembered the first night she lived with me, the way she looked up at me from her tiny bed, sleep still wet on her lashes, and asked, "Grandma, will you always be here?" I had said, "Till the earth doesn't turn," and meant it with every fiber of my being. Yet here, in this moment, I felt every promise unravel beneath me. I watched her, this woman who was once the child curled into my lap, deliver the perfect speech for Instagram caption and then reduce me to a punchline live in the dressing room. I looked down at my dress, hand-me-down from my own daughter's wedding decades ago. Its floral pattern faded, but the lace still intact. It had been pressed and steamed to appear clean and supple, but its soft pastel design looked out of place beside her couture and designer gowns. They had told me to wear something understated, and I had listened. But now I saw the implication behind the words. Wear something forgettable. Look like you belong in the background. The team around me parted, forming an aisle through which I walked unannounced, heading out the back exit. No one admonished me. They were too busy smoothing wrinkles in the bride's train, adjusting jewelry, double-checking the hairpieces. I stepped outside into the cooling Missouri afternoon and inhaled deeply. The air tasted of freshly cut lawn and an approaching storm. Not that it mattered anymore. I thought of my granddaughter's voice, sharp, polished, biting, saying I looked poor. I thought of the expenses she and her fiancé did not understand I had nurtured. The venue, the cake, the music, the floral arch, the waitstaff and the linens. Every dollar of it came from the trust I had set aside when she lost her mother, funds I had planned for the day she found someone to share her life with. She had married a man who came from money, and suddenly the world mattered more than the woman who had raised her. I fingered the handkerchief, dry between my hands now, and thought of those nights when the two of us would fall asleep watching the ceiling fan spin stories out of the gloom. How I had sat at the foot of her bed, praying for her future, hoping she would rise stronger than the sorrow that brought her to me. I remembered the first time she said, "I love you," before drifting off, the way her voice wavered between gratitude and fatigue, and now this. I closed my eyes and let tears gather just long enough to feel their weight, and then I wiped them quickly. I would not cry in front of them. I would not give her the satisfaction. I walked to the side of the venue, found the manager stepping between cocktails and guests arriving early. The arch outside the door framed the back of the building, leaves rustling in the soft wind. I tapped him on the shoulder. "May I have the venue key back?" I asked quietly. He looked me up and down, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Mrs. Thompson?" he said carefully. "I thought you were the grandmother of the bride. Everything is all set?" "I am," I said, "but it is no longer my event." I slipped the handkerchief into my purse and stood tall, even as my heart pounded. "Thank you very much." He hesitated, but I nodded. He handed over a small brass key, ornate, heavy like stone. I tucked it into my coat pocket and walked away, past closed doors, past voices on the verge of celebration, until the building swallowed me in its stone walls. Out in the parking lot I found my car, the familiar brown station wagon waiting for me like an old friend. I leaned on its hood and watched guests arrive, their laughter floating through the air. My granddaughter stepped into the light, escorted by her uncles, holding her father's arm. Her dress flowed around her, her veil catching the wind, her eyes distant. She looked radiant, but I saw the fear behind her smile, the uncertainty of a woman unsure if she had done this right. I got into my car, locked the door with deliberate care, and backed out slowly, giving her one last look. Her shoulders fell for a moment as the realization hit. I did not linger. I drove away before tears could begin their rehearsed journey down her cheeks. I did not speed. I did not fast forward. I drove straight to a diner on the outskirts of town, small and empty except for the coffee steam and the morning newspaper. I ordered a slice of cherry pie and tea, and I ate without hurry. The pie tasted like a second chance, sweet and unexpected after a long stretch of sacrifice. Sitting there, alone with the veneer of strangers around me, I felt the weight lift off my heart. I had come to her wedding to celebrate her joy, but she had made it clear she did not see me. I was not misplaced. I was dismissed. Let her think she could erase me. Let her believe that funding her dreams meant owning me, but I hold the key. And one day she will realize that I was never the guest. I was the foundation. I entered the reception room quietly, careful not to draw attention. The room was elegant. Crystal chandeliers, white-draped tables, floral centerpieces rising like silent monuments. Guests were seated, laughter filling the air, but I found my name on the assigned seating chart. The planner, leaning over to explain, said my seat was just a little out of the way, near the back, beside the restroom door. I managed a nod. I could live with a discreet spot, so long as I still had a seat. When I sat down, I realized I was last, literally the final chair at the end of the row. Everyone else had a spot closer to the head table, the bridal party, the in-laws, even a few distant cousins I barely recognized. I caught a glimpse of them tossing silent glances in my direction, half apology, half amusement. Sinking lower into my chair, as if I might disappear into the carpet, I looked up at the dais. My granddaughter and new grandson-in-law were smiling and waving, but I felt disconnected, like the world had built a stage and forgotten to invite me to the spotlight. A young woman, smoothly dressed and perfectly coiffed, sat beside me. Someone I assumed was part of the catering staff. She carried a clipboard, wearing a professional smile, and every few minutes she made eye contact with the planners behind the scenes, relaying timing cues. I was broadcasting my own question. Why was I here, if they preferred not to hear me speak? The music began softly, and in that moment, I remembered all the ways I had shaped this gathering. My hands had poured money into every vendor's hand: the venue fee, the cake, the floral arch, the meals, the sound system, and yes, the microphone system too. I had been told I didn't have to worry about cost, that I should sit back. That should have felt like love. But sitting here, it felt like erasure. I remembered working 2 jobs to raise her, nights at the hospital, days cleaning homes. I recalled signing my wedding ring over for her school fees before my husband passed. I remembered every scholarship I fought for, every scholarship letter I celebrated, because I had given time and sacrifice to ensure she had opportunity to meet this man she loved, and yet now I had no voice. I finally realized why my seat was so far, why no playlist included my bumpkin stories. I leaned over and asked the attendant at my side, "Excuse me, who is speaking first?" She looked startled. "Your granddaughter is giving a speech after the cake cutting, ma'am." So that meant there would have been a mic saved for me, or at least a second mic. I looked to the planners beside the head table. They were busy, heads down on phones, fingers turning out the next cue. I searched for the mic stand that had been thoughtfully set up earlier. It was missing. Suddenly I understood my place in this celebration. Not only was I placed at the back of the line, I was erased from the program. Before I could process fully, the moment arrived. The head table stood, clinking glasses. My granddaughter's voice trembled as she began her speech, her eyes fixed forward. Guests quieted, anticipation glowing in the low lights. I held my applause, waiting for a cue to step forward, but none came. Then her voice cracked when she mentioned the people who had made it possible. She turned slowly, expecting to see me, and then looking for me. When she saw an empty seat behind, her throat closed and tears gathered. "No microphone," she whispered, or at least attempted to, but her gaze never turned to me. I realized she assumed I would not speak, so they did not prepare a mic. I swallowed hard, feeling every knot in the fabric of that beautiful dress lock into place as her groom took her hand and gently guided her away. I sat back, mouth dry, tears not yet welling. I thought of the nights she had clutched my hand before school, shaken with nerves. I thought about her mother, the first love of my life, taken too soon, and how I used my grief to raise this girl who now looked like a stranger. Someone behind me laughed, a patron of family wealth. I saw her eyebrows silently ask, "Isn't it quaint how she saved that seat for her?" I closed my eyes and recalled what had made me want this day to be perfect for her. The smile on her face when she discovered her first paycheck in my hand, the pride that lit her eyes when she walked across a stage I could no longer step onto. After the cake cutting, an announcement came. "Now we have a mother-daughter dance." I watched couples rise. I watched moms pulled to the floor, babies scooped from high chairs. I waited. No one came for me. I waited longer, and then I understood. My granddaughter had denied me the role, not explicitly, but quietly, sneakily, convincingly. I might not have accepted the mic earlier, but she didn't even leave me the chance. I steeled myself. Good. That would be remembered. I stared at a champagne flute, half empty, before sliding out of my chair. I felt the sticky feel of cake frosting under my literature fingers when I brushed them on my dress. I walked slowly across the room. No music followed me. No whispers trailed. Actually, there was a hush, a low, uncomfortable hush, maybe because someone knew they had crossed a line. I passed the head table, just behind the bridal party. My granddaughter glanced away, avoiding my gaze. I felt a pulse in my throat rising. I looked at her husband's polite expression, the nervous bride next to him. I think they thought I would ask for a second round of cake, or worse, remind them I existed. But I did not. I kept walking. I did not want theirs. And yet, I belonged to this day as her grandmother, as a mother, as the rock beneath every step she would take today. I exited the back door, stepped onto warm concrete, and leaned into the evening air. I reached into my purse and retrieved the handkerchief her mother had embroidered. I touched the delicate fabric, feeling my grandmother's name stitched into its edge. Althea. She used to say the same prayer after every misfortune. "We shall stand again. Stronger." I folded the cloth in my hand and pressed it to my heart. I reached the parking lot and paused beside my car. A shot of wind filled my ears. The evening sky turned pink, soft as hope. I watched as her guests continued to lift their glasses, laughing as the band started again. Most of them turned away before I walked past them, back into my life, the one I chose when I chose me. I settled into the driver's seat and closed my eyes for a moment. Then, I started the car and drove away, lightly as someone with nothing pulling at her feet, but everything pulling her heart. I am the one who held her when the world stopped. I am the one who built this day for her. And I did not forget. But she did. And tonight, she would cry for a cake she did not fully appreciate. And tomorrow, she will forever feel the echo of silence I left behind. And maybe that was the point. She did not want me to shine that day. She wanted me quiet, tucked into a corner like an afterthought. But I was not a decoration in her curated life. I was the reason she had one. That old dress did not embarrass me. It reminded me of who I had always been, and who I would always remain, long after the silk gowns were boxed up and forgotten. As I stood near the guest table, one of the few places left where I did not feel invisible, I heard her voice. "You remember when my friend laughed at your dress, Grandma? Called it trailer park chic?" she asked a distant guest, a new coworker in a pastel suit. I felt embarrassed. I just changed after that. I stiffened. She said embarrassed, not hurt, not sad, embarrassed. And that single word carried more weight than I expected. I thought of our life together after her mother died, how I slept on a reclining chair in her room for months so she would not be alone. I thought of how I sewed patches on her jeans after she grew out of them every winter. I thought of how she used to dig through dresser drawers looking for my scarves, pretending it was her own. Now she was apologizing for me. I watched her laugh, hand brushing her cheek, throwing her hair back, the way she had when she was 10 and first discovered a secret crush. But this time, her eyes did not light up toward me. They stayed guarded, practiced. She looked like someone who had rehearsed a speech about gratitude, but not a moment about her roots. In the next round of toasts, I heard her half mutter, "We're not like them anymore, Grandma. We've moved up." The words struck me like a slap. Moved up, gentrification of identity, detachment from origin. Her voice carried entitlement, distance disguised in early wealth. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. Moving up had a cost. Today, I paid it. Around me, the reception continued, a live band playing cover songs, guests sipping champagne, servers passing trays of hors d'oeuvres. I felt like I was behind a glass wall, watching but not allowed in. When she was young, she'd tug my sleeve and whisper, "Tell me a story, Grandma." I told one, a bedtime fable, about a young girl who planted a seed and watched it become a flower strong enough to weather storms. She loved it. She asked for it every night. Now, in front of her friends and new colleagues, she introduced me as a nice older person from my mom's side. A concession of acknowledgement, the kind you give your mother after your stepmother chooses what matters. But instead, I folded my hands in my lap and let the music swell without me. I was not bitter, just awake. Awake to the truth that love, given without conditions, could still be forgotten. Awake to the ache of being edited out of a story I helped write. And as she twirled in the glow of borrowed admiration, I whispered to myself, "You were never small. They just stopped looking." Then it happened. A distant aunt approached, took me by the elbow. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "they want you to join the family photo." She guided me toward the photo backdrop, where rows of smiling faces waited. I took a breath and stepped forward. They positioned me in the second row. I used half the proceeds to create a trust in my granddaughter's name for her future, her dreams, her wedding if she ever found someone kind enough. The other half I used to build a life of modest independence. I never told her the full story. I wanted the gift to feel free. But nothing should be given blindly, especially not your legacy. That night after the wedding, I stared at the trust account's dashboard on my laptop. Scheduled payments to vendors, final disbursement for honeymoon expenses, and at the bottom, a button labeled Hold Transfer. I hovered my mouse over it, remembering her words. "You look poor, Grandma," and I pressed click, not out of spite, but out of clarity. I had been invisible for too long. If silence is all I was offered, then silence I would give. But mine would echo where it mattered most, in the fine print, in the frozen funds, in the lessons that follow luxury denied. I closed the laptop, turned off the lamp, and crawled into bed. For the first time in years, I slept through the night. Because I remembered, I was never small. I was simply out of view. And now I had stepped back into the light. I divided the proceeds. A part went into savings for myself. The rest, half the value, went into a trust for my granddaughter. A wedding fund, I had promised her quietly. I had signed documents naming her as the beneficiary, but deliberately kept control over disbursements. To me, it felt like protection, a way to ensure that foundation for her future would not be taken for granted. I spread the documents on my desk, the trust ledger, my handwritten notes, the disbursement schedule. In bold, my name appeared as trustee. Her name was listed below. I realized I was still the key holder. A strange sensation rose in me, like discovering I carried someone else's heartbeat inside my own chest. I felt that if I wanted to, I could call tomorrow and say, "No funds today." Just like that, I could halt every charge, every payment, every expectation. I remembered the day I signed that trust. I sat in the financial advisor's office with trembling hands, holding the pen over the dotted line. She said, "This is a generous gift." I told her, "No, this is a promise." The advisor nodded and later walked me through tax implications, responsibility, legal precautions. I took notes. I asked questions. I needed to feel sure. Monday morning, I called her again. Her voice was kind, professional. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," she said. "How may I help you?" "I have a question," I said, trying to steady my voice. "Can I freeze the trust fund? Just for today?" There was a quiet pause. "Absolutely. You hold the key," she said. "Just submit a request, or I can put a hold on the account." My throat felt thick. "Yes, please. Do that. Understood, she replied. I will place a freeze. Funds will remain until you decide otherwise. I stood there, letting the weight lift from my chest, not in triumph, but in truth. I was not trying to ruin a wedding. I was reclaiming my place in the story. They wrote me out with whispers and wardrobe edits, but I remembered every page, every bedtime story, every ride to practice. I did not need applause or a toast in my honor. I just needed to stop funding my own erasure. As the confirmation screen faded, I whispered to no one in particular, "You cannot dishonor what you still depend on." And in that quiet, I finally felt whole. No alerts popped up, no email said, "You are about to delete everything," for wedding party members. It was quiet, clinical, and absolute. I closed the laptop. I placed the trust documents back in the envelope. I tucked them in the drawer again. That evening, the phone rang. My granddaughter's number flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. There was no way I could help her now, not with words, not with speeches, not with perfumes or flowers or approval. She had separated herself from the love that raised her, and I wanted her to feel the emptiness she left behind. I remember the first speech she wrote in elementary school. "My grandma is beautiful and kind. She taught me how to bake cookies and how to stand tall." I printed it and framed it. It hung by her bedside until she left for college. I remember tucking it into her luggage, tears on the pages. That framed piece of paper is still in my house. It hangs above my fireplace, a reminder of who she was and who she still can be. But I also have the trust documents now, the key and the knowing. I have something I have never had before: choice. And choice is not petty or spiteful. It is strength. If she wants to reach me, she can. But I will speak to her on my terms. I lit a candle in the dining room, a soft lavender scent, her grandmother's favorite. I sat down. Tonight I will sleep in my quiet house. Tomorrow I will wake, knowing I belong here. I am the guardian of her future, not a guest in it. They said I was too old-timey. They said I looked poor. But while they chose image over substance, I chose to remember my own worth. The key is in my hands. The fund is in my name. The power of silence is my voice. So I remain unshaken. I sat in my car, parked just 50 yards from the entrance of the reception hall. Inside, the chandelier gleamed, the clock ticked toward the cake-cutting ceremony, and guests chatted in hushed excitement. But out here, in the gravel lot, I leaned against my door and sipped lukewarm coffee, listening to the distant hum of celebration I had paid for but was no longer part of. They came to me on the phone first. "Ma'am, we're terribly sorry to inform you the cake hasn't been paid for." The voice on the other end was apologetic but clipped. I held the phone loosely in my hand, window, mind drifting to the weeks I had called and asked, "Please make sure this goes through. We also cannot release the band," another voice added, the waitstaff shifting in the background. "And the venue is suspending food service because there was nothing left for me there. Not regret, not longing, not even a lesson. I had already learned it. And now, so would she." The silence of that halted celebration said everything words never could. It echoed through unpaid vendors and unanswered questions, through the toppled centerpiece and unopened favors, through the absence of the woman who had given her everything and asked for nothing but decency. They would rewrite the story, of course, blame technical errors, a last-minute cancellation, perhaps even me, the difficult grandma. That was fine. Let them rewrite it. I had my copy, the true one. I drove home with the window cracked, letting the wind tug softly at the loose hair around my face. The sun dipped behind Missouri trees, casting long shadows across the road. But inside me, something had broken free of shadow altogether. I had not crashed a wedding. I had simply withdrawn my blessing. And sometimes, that is louder than any toast. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the ignition, and sat in the fading light, the box of shortcake now empty beside me, the brass key resting in the cup holder. They had called me an embarrassment, but tonight I remembered what it feels like to hold the pen, and I had written the final scene. I thought of her tears inside the suite, but I did not soften, because those tears were hers to feel, not mine to erase. I finished the shortcake, I rolled down my window and let the night air wash over me, and I drove home, without cake worries, without apology, without the need to be seen again. Nobody had the courage to call me. Maybe everyone was afraid I'd hang up. Maybe I'd hung up on them silently by walking away. But word traveled. My neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, knocked on my door the next morning. She stood well back on the porch, hat in hand and eyes serious. "I just had to tell you," she said quietly. "She was screaming your name when the lights went out. I heard it clear as day." It was enough. I nodded and thanked her, offered her a cup of tea, but she shook her head and left. I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, fingertips pressed to my heart. Then I walked inside and put away my laptop. This time for good. I released my earrings, one delicate rose petal of silver, and slipped them into a small velvet box. I hung my wedding ring on the jewelry tree I keep near the mirror. Then I filled a small pot with water and vegetables, carrots, celery, a few potatoes, and simmered soup while ironed linens in the quiet. The countdown ended on the stove. A simple act, but a choice. I felt no regret, not for what I did, not for what I withheld. Instead, I felt light, free, like the air that enters a room after you open all the windows, letting go of stale energy. Around midday, my email chimed. From the event coordinator. "We are deeply sorry for the confusion regarding the trust fund and the sudden pause. We did not know that Mrs. Thompson held legal authority over the payments involved in tonight's ceremony." Another note. "Please accept our apologies." Another. "If you would be willing to share how this came to pass, we would appreciate the opportunity to learn." I allowed myself a small smile. They did not know why it had to happen this way, but they could still learn. I tapped the email box, drafted a reply. "Thank you for reminding me I still have choices." Then I sent it. It felt like dropping a pebble in a still pond and watching the ripples spread. Outside, the world carried on. Children laughed as they boarded buses, someone's lawnmower roared down the street, a dog barked in the distance. My house remained quiet. I ate the last of the soup, satisfying and warm. No guests, no celebrations, no awkward apologies. In the afternoon, I opened a drawer containing wedding photographs, those digital files I had never shared, images of guests dancing, flowers arcing toward the sky, my granddaughter's smile lit by sparkle lights. I deleted them all, not out of spite, out of intention. These memories were hers, not mine to keep. I deleted the images, letting the files fade into software oblivion. Each image deleted felt like another small step toward reclaiming what was mine. Not in bitterness, but in clarity. By evening, I sat in the soft light of my living room. A candle burned nearby. I held a cup of lavender tea as the furnace hummed comfortably. I thought about quiet, the kind of silence that does not hum with sorrow, but sings with self-respect. I thought about the lesson I learned too late. Never let kindness be mistaken for weakness. My phone buzzed on the table. My granddaughter's message. "Mom and Dad say maybe we can fix this." I read it and tapped like, but said nothing. She might come calling again, but this time I will answer when and if I choose. I remembered who I was before want and need eroded my boundaries. I remembered that love and funds are not the same. Love is shared. Funds can be given, sheltered, or withdrawn. The day did not bring headlines. No news van stood outside. No fears. Just me. With my soup bowl empty, my heart steadier than it had been in years, my mind clear. One day I will speak with my granddaughter again. Maybe we will laugh, maybe we will cry. But right now I am choosing silence, simplicity, and a peace I earn. And when the echoes of last night's celebration have fully faded, I'll keep this moment, quiet, full, and wholly mine. I remember that first Saturday vividly, the one when I decided I wouldn't hold someone else's dress anymore, not literally, not metaphorically, not ever again. I walked into the community arts center, walked past tables of brushes and glazes, and introduced myself to the ceramics instructor. She greeted me with warmth, but no pity. It felt like a fresh start. My hands trembled as I molded clay beneath them, soft, pliable, obedient. The clay didn't care about my age or my baggage. It just responded when I applied pressure, when I shaped it with purpose. That afternoon, I learned how to throw a pot. The wheel slipped at first, the clay collapsed. But when I finally made it stand tall, upright, I realized something. If I could shape mud into something beautiful, maybe I could shape my own life too. I started going every Saturday. The other women in the class ranged in age, background, and skill. Some used clay to craft sculptures. Others released decades-old emotions into vases. I began shaping ritual bowls, the kind that hold soup or soul. I let the kiln fire be a metaphor, and the finished pieces felt like new chapters in my hands. I also reached out to old friends, women I had lost touch with because my life became caregiving, fixing, supporting others. One afternoon, I met my former book club at a coffee shop downtown. We sat on the patio, sipping lattes and reminiscing about books we once dissected. Life-changing lines, heated arguments over Hemingway's intent. I brought a couple of unfinished bowls to show them, and they cheered as if I'd written a novel. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen, not as mom or grandma or trustee of a trust fund, but as me. That evening, I returned home to my quiet house and sat down at my desk. I pulled out stationery I'd kept since my daughter's wedding and penned a letter, not to anyone else, but to myself 20 years ago. I imagined the version of me who just had a newborn, whose husband was working graveyard shifts in a factory, whose eyes were bright with hope, but weary already, thinking love demanded sacrifice above all else. In shaky script, I wrote, "Dear Laura, you deserved more than silence. You deserved respect. You deserved peace. You never should have lost sight of your own voice." I sealed and dated the envelope without intending to mail it. It was therapy. It was absolution. One afternoon, I opened a flyer at the senior center. Attend a workshop. Know your rights. Protect your assets. I signed up with trembling fingers. Turns out, they expected a retired accountant or lawyer. Imagine their surprise when a grandmother from rural Missouri walked in. I introduced myself and shared my story, how I created that trust fund, how I quietly saved for her daughter's wedding, how no one thought to thank me. They listened. Their eyes, their nods, that authority I held, legal, moral, transformed into something more. I taught them how to read deeds, how to identify power of attorney forms, how to keep copies of mortgages and wills in safety deposit boxes. One woman cried when I told her, "Your son does not have the right to refinance your home without your signature." Another closed her eyes with relief after shredding that joint credit card her granddaughter kept maxed out. Some of the ladies called me after the workshop. "Do you hate your granddaughter now?" one asked, voice full of worry, as if they believed I had become cruel overnight. I did not hesitate. I laughed gently and said, "No, I just chose peace over being tolerated, because hatred is heavy. I had borne enough burdens in my lifetime." That Christmas, with no wedding in sight and no drama, I hosted a small dinner at my home. I cooked roast chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy from scratch, green beans, and a simple chocolate cake. The women from my old book club came, along with a few participants from the legal workshop. My table was lively. Laughter, uplifting stories, real connection. Someone looked at me across the table and said, "Laura, I don't know how you do it. You lost so much, but look at you now." I responded, quietly, "I'm just living, and living is the only thing I felt I had left to do." I walked away from caregiving as my sole identity that night, and I embraced being whole again. I found a new rhythm. My weekdays began with a walk along the river, slow, intentional steps as the sunrise wrote gold across the water. I journaled there, perfecting my handwriting on blank pages, thinking of that graduation speech I never gave, the milestone memories I missed while saving everyone else's. On Fridays, I taught a mini legal circle at the library. Local women filled the chairs. Grandmothers, widows, mothers of special needs kids, hungry for knowledge. I lit up discussing estate planning forms, guardianship, and how to file photocopies with bank managers. One week, a young woman said, "You're like that grandma in the movies who trains a community." I smiled and thought of another line I'd kept in my mind, "Grandma with the last laugh." By spring, I sold the antique jewelry box on my dresser, my only bargaining chip I'd hesitated to part with, and used the proceeds to refurbish the art studio. New clay, new glazes, new kiln pads. When the studio announced it on their social media, they posted a photo of me at the wheel, clay spinning beneath my calloused fingers. The comments flooded in, inspiring, warrior, beautiful soul. At night, I sit by the window and knit or work on a vase. I still think of my granddaughter sometimes, I wonder if she ever thinks of me. Maybe not. Maybe this is what being loved unconditionally looks like a flame you shield from wind until it fades. But I am no longer the one holding up a roll. I am no longer the one wiping tears or stitching dresses. I finished my shift, and I left the stage. My Thursday nights are the best now. My classmates from ceramics and I eat pizza, talk about our clay fails, our aspirations. We cheer each other's tiny triumphs, a well-balanced bowl, a glaze that doesn't crack, a story we share. Then we drive home with clay dust in our hair and stories in our hearts. A neighbor asked me once, with genuine curiosity, "Don't you ever miss how your granddaughter used to look at you?" I looked out the window, saw moonlight dancing on the car parked across the street, and said, "Sometimes, but I don't miss being forgotten." So to those who feel their identity slipping away under the weight of caretaking or courtesy or those unspoken expectations, here is my truth. You are not a background character in someone else's life. You are not merely a story of what you did for others. You are a story worth telling. I do not hate my granddaughter. I remember the time she was 6, and we ran around the living room with balloons, laughter bouncing off the walls so loud you could hear it for blocks. I remember her breathless, "Grandma, watch this!" and the way I caught her as she tumbled off the couch. She was my heartbeat, my pride, my reminder that even after heartbreak, love could grow again. It hurts to admit that she no longer sees me, but I also refuse to raise her from a distance. I cannot rescue her from the lesson she must learn, because sometimes love isn't about saving them. It's about letting them face the consequences of a choice they made. If you are a grandmother or a mother reading this, know this. Being kind does not mean you have to be silent. Being generous does not mean you have to be powerless. Being quiet does not mean being invisible. I taught my granddaughter to walk, to read, to dream. I scooped her up when the world seemed cold. I held her hand through every scraped knee and every broken heart. Yet today, I stand apart from her celebration because of how she treated me. She called me embarrassing. She told me my voice didn't fit her moment. She told me I looked poor. My heart breaks for the little girl who once hid in my coat and whispered, "Just a little more love." But my heart does not break for the woman who thought money gave her the right to silence me. I hold no bitterness against her, just sadness that she forgot where home came from. So here is my message to every child whose roots they choose to ignore. Do not forget the hands that built your foundation. Do not erase the ones who carried memories you now take for granted. Do not assume that because your world has changed, she no longer belongs. Because some memories you cannot remake, some foundations you cannot rebuild. To the women out there whose grandchildren stepped away from respect, hold fast to your worth. Speak your voice, even without applause. Protect your dignity, even if you are only protecting a reflection of who you once were. Teach her by example that no one can erase the past without losing part of themselves. Because every gift you gave was not an investment. It was an offering of heart. And every time she rejects you, she rejects a piece of her own story. I once said I would stop holding up her dress so she could walk the aisle. Now I say I will hold up my head and walk away. I will not be a shadow at the edge of her memories. I will not be the grandmother who fades in silence. Because I am worth more than that. I am the woman who built the garden where she grew, the arms that comforted her when life hurt, the voice that whispered courage when the world seemed big. She may forget, but I will remember. And one day, maybe not today, she will remember too, when she cannot cut a cake with money she never earned, or buy a moment better than the one that came from grace. On that day, I hope she realizes that what she called embarrassing was never what made me small. What made me invisible was her choice not to see me. But tonight, I choose to be seen by those who matter. Friends, neighbors, women who stood beside me when I needed it most. I choose to be seen by the woman I used to be, and the woman I choose to be now. I was once erased from a celebration. Now I hold the key and pride in the silence she left behind. My granddaughter called me embarrassing, but today I hold the key, and she's still crying over a cake that never got served. Thank you for listening. If you saw yourself in my story, even just for a moment, then know this. You are not alone. There are thousands of us out there, women who held families together with bare hands and soft hearts, women who were called too much and not enough in the same breath. But not anymore. At Grandma, True Stories, we speak the truths that were once whispered in the kitchen or buried in silence. We remember everything they hoped we'd forget, and we tell it, not for revenge, but for reckoning. If this story stirred something in you, if you believe wisdom should be heard, not hidden, subscribe to Grandma True Stories, because our voices are not too old, they are just on time. And remember, when a grandma speaks, the world finally listens.